Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Man, I feel like I've got you a little trained on that. I feel like it's a bit of a call and response now. I love that. We're in our sermon series on sacred calling. We're discovering ways in which we're invited into the work of God, into a calling that's both holy and healing, and a calling that gives our lives meaning and direction. And folks, I don't know about you, but I long for meaning and direction. But I will say, I'm not the quickest to trust directions. Or at least I'm not the quickest to trust direction givers. It really depends on who's giving me that direction. My grandma, growing up, she would call herself the turnaround queen. Because wherever we would go, it would probably take 15 to 20 minutes longer than it should have. I remember, we didn't have GPS on our phones, and I guess maybe my grandma was more hard-headed than I knew. But she knew the area we needed to get to, but not the exact destination. I remember we do a loop. She's like, it's somewhere around here. I remember us stopping and getting out like an atlas and just kind of like looking for where we're supposed to be. And listen, maps can be untrustworthy givers of directions. Drawn maps can't change with the landscapes. It can't change quickly if a road name is changed or a new road is added. And maps have a way of being untrustworthy depending on the goals of the people making those maps. For instance, Paul, can we get our first map up here? This is a map here by Heinrich Bunting. And this is a map of the world, if you didn't know. We've got Europe, we've got Asia, we've got Africa. In this corner, we've got America. And listen, I don't think Heinrich set out to make a geographically accurate map, all right? But he did want to make a map that focused on the centrality of Jerusalem, so you can see Jerusalem at the center of that map. Or, how about the island of California? Paul, next image. If you didn't know California was an island or a solid landmass, you might be confused by this. And listen, this map was made in 1666, and this wasn't a one-off error. For a long time, California was shown by an island, so much so, about 100 years later, King Ferdinand VI of Spain had to make a decree that California is not an island. Or, how about an entire mountain range that was made up? This mountain range right here, it's called the Mountains of Calm. You can see right along here. And that's a fictional mountain range. But it did make it into an atlas. It was put there because explorers had written these travelogues describing these great mountains. But then eventually, explorers went to go look for those mountains and didn't find anything there. But listen, we've made great technological leaps in directions, right? Instead of physical maps, we have GPS. And every one of us has a GPS built into our car and to our phone. But even those have some issues. Because the GPS is really only as accurate as the information I put in, or even the cell reception I have. For instance, Mount Rushmore is one of our country's most famous landmarks. But when you type in Mount Rushmore, South Dakota, to your GPS, multiple locations will come up. So maybe you try a different spelling, try to narrow it down, and that's where the trouble starts. Supposedly, it's really difficult to find Mount Rushmore on GPS, at least as of 2016. And not only is it difficult to find, but wrong GPS routes have directed multiple people to a camp that's about 12 miles away So much so, they had to put up this sign. Your GPS is wrong. This is not Mount Rushmore, with directions. Go back to Highway 16. And in case any of you were going to visit Mount Rushmore, supposedly they recommend typing in Keystone SD 57751, and supposedly that gets you not in the exact area, but like close enough. Or, last picture, we have this picture of delivery driver John Roberts, who almost went off a 100-foot cliff because his GPS led him there. He's a delivery driver who goes to places he doesn't often frequent, and so his GPS, he trusts it with his life. He was quoted saying, "It kept insisting the path was a road, and even as it got narrower and steeper, I trusted it." You know, it's hard to know what to trust, especially things that are giving us directions. Which is why our psalm today is so difficult, because it calls us into our holy vocation of trusting God even in the midst of chaos. In Psalm 46, we get 3 specific instances on where to trust. 3 instances where your trust and my trust is sure to falter. The first one is in natural calamity. But not just any natural calamity, in an apocalypse-level event. Though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Whatever happening is literally earth-shaking. Literal mountains falling into the sea. The psalmist is bringing the reader into the end of the world. Death is certainly around the corner. Also in the midst of political and national hardship, God's voice is to be heard. The nations are in uproar. Kingdoms totter. Do you remember that kingdom with the unstoppable military force? Do you remember that kingdom with the high walls and the really strong leaders? Do you remember that kingdom with a great commerce and that really cool Colosseum? The kingdom we all thought would last forever? That kingdom is fallen. And lastly, in the midst of militaristic strife, God will bring peace. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. These things are the most troublesome situations for us, where we are certain to lose confidence, where we are certain to turn to whatever we can to gain a bit of control from what we feel is slipping away. These situations take a look at your spiritual GPS and say, are you sure you know where this is going? Are you sure you trust the directions given? These end-of-world events have us in the shoes of someone like Peter. Jesus calls him out on the water, and he's walking on the water just fine, but as the waves rise and get a little scary, as thunder cracks around him, his eyes and his focus start to shift. The psalm is calling us trusting in the midst of fear. This psalm calls us into our sacred calling of trusting God even in the hardest of times. And I think it's important to clarify what I'm trusting God to do and what I'm trusting God with. Because when I read God as our refuge and strength, as your resident nerd, this picture of the Batmobile, Paul, next one, comes into my mind. When I think of God as refuge and strength, I think of this Batmobile. It's a literal tank. It is the most fortified. It has gadgets that can keep it protected. It can even harm someone else trying to get it. It doesn't give away. It protects Batman. But this isn't what I believe trusting in God gives me. When I say I trust in God in hardship, I don't think God protects me from hardship. I don't think I live my life in a bubble that keeps me away from suffering. And Jesus gives two great analogies about this in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talks about how God makes the sun shine on the good and the bad. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. There's no spiritual depth you can reach where you get a free pass from the suffering of this world. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, we get a story about a man who builds his house on stone. That when, not if, the winds and the rain come, you can have a sturdy foundation. Just because you build your house on stone doesn't give you control of the weather. The winds and the rain will come. It's just a matter of when. And I trust the same God that didn't escape suffering themselves. God entered into the midst of suffering with Jesus. Our story of Jesus could have ended with Jesus retiring with a nice 401k and a comfortable 1,000-sheet count linen bed surrounded by his loved ones. Our story could have ended with Jesus walking into the sunset on a flaming cloud of fire, the Batmobile swinging into heaven with him. And in Revelation, Jesus could have presented himself as the Lion of Judah. An image that would give people of Israel strength and comfort, a rallying cry of regality and untouchability. But when Jesus revealed himself to John in Revelation 5, we got not the lion, but the lamb. Jesus presents himself as the sacrificial lamb. God came down into suffering with us, not to protect us from it, but to enter into it with us. When I say I trust God, like Psalm 46, God calls me to trust God, who enters into the apocalyptic event with me. As the mountains are moving into the sea, I am not alone, because I wouldn't trust any other God. I don't trust a God that sees the horrible news on TV and goes, ugh, what a shame. I hope they figure it out. I trust a God who died by the Romans for the Romans. I trust a God who entered into the depths of suffering with me. I don't trust God to save me from suffering, but I do trust God to be with me in it. And as God is with me, in the fear and in the suffering, I get direction. A GPS pointing the way through a rocky road. Direction in suffering and taking me through suffering. Because one of the worst places to be in suffering is alone. And covenant, I'm scared. I feel like when I see the current times, I feel like I'm reading Psalm 46. I mean, pick a news story this week, church. Pick a news story in the last year. I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling scared. And fear has a way of keeping me planted. It has a way of keeping my eyes right here. But when I check in with myself, when I approach my fear with humility, and when I can listen, I hear a sacred calling from God. A call to listen. A call to trust. A calling giving me directions into healing and into love. And a presence to let me know I'm not alone. That calls me to let my community know They're not alone. To encourage me to find ways to comfort those around me as God comforts me. To find ways to enter into the hardship with others as God enters into it with me. And we may have trust issues from our current directions, from human-made maps and GPS systems that don't know the way. But the directions I'm talking about aren't man-made. God's directions come from above, pointing into our sacred calling, telling us, be still and know that I am God. If you'd like to follow these directions and see where they lead, join me now as we stand and as we sing.